I'd like to thank you all to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Ian Thomas Ash, and I'm a member here at the club. We have a very short time now for the Q&A and for the speech, and so I will keep my comments very short. I would like to welcome Dr. Mai Sato, who is here with a very important and very topical film. And so without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to her to give a short presentation that will be followed by a Q&A. Following the film screening, there will be an informal time that will be without an MC, that Dr. Sato will remain here in this room to be able to answer any additional questions you have after seeing the film. And during the screening, if anyone is not able to stay for the film, but they do have a couple of questions, Dr. Sato has agreed to leave the room during the screening and to meet with you in a separate room. So if anyone would like to speak with her during the screening, please follow us out after the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay. I have 15 minutes, so I'll get into it now. What characterizes the Japanese death penalty is secrecy. This unofficial illustration was all that was available until 2010. In 2010, the then Justice Minister, as a one-off event, authorized cameras to enter an empty execution room to film what the room looks like, which looks like this. And until 2011, the names of those who were executed were not made public. And secrecy extends to other areas of the Japanese death penalty, such as the selection process of who gets executed next, cost, and the treatment of death row inmates. So bearing this in mind, the limited information available to the public, what's ironic is that the official justification for retaining the death penalty is majority public support. My work for the last 6 years has focused on public attitudes to the death penalty. In particular, I focused on the impact of information. So if you provide people with new information, how malleable their opinions are. I conducted surveys and social experiments to test how much or how little people know about the Japanese death penalty and how malleable people's opinions are. I've started to share my findings in my book, which was published last year, and a report which I co-authored with a UK-based NGO, the Death Penalty Project. This work has captured the imagination of foreign embassies, UK, German, Norway, Swiss, foreign offices, and the EU, which led to the launch of this new report that you have today and the documentary. The new report adds to my previous work in two ways. First is that the funding at a much larger scale enabled me to conduct the surveys properly with more rigorous methodology. Second, this report tries to look at the public attitudes to the death penalty in a slightly different angle. The previous report was very much on the paradox of secrecy surrounding the death penalty on one hand, and on the other, the uninformed and the misinformed public, where they are the decision makers for the future death penalty policy. This report, what I wanted to focus on, is to deal directly about the Japanese government's claim, which is that the Japanese government takes this public opinion argument very seriously by carrying out its own survey every 5 years since the 1950s. The results have been quoted by the Minister of Justice, the government, in every state party report submitted to the UN Human Rights Committee. And it is the justification for why Japan cannot abolish the death penalty. So the Japanese government's basically arguing that the death penalty is so central to maintaining the legitimacy of the criminal justice system, and that abolition would erode the legitimacy to an unacceptable degree. As we know, the 2014 survey showed that 80% of the public supported the death penalty. So the questions I'm interested in this report are, what does this 80% really mean? And how important is the death penalty to the Japanese public? And what may be the consequence if the government decides to abolish? Would abolition really erode legitimacy and decrease trust in the criminal justice system? So this report analyzes 4 data sets: the 2014 government survey, 1967 government survey, and the 2 surveys we've conducted. I've only got 15 minutes today, so I'm going to focus on the reanalysis of the 2014 government survey and the results from the parallel survey. The deliberative poll, the last survey, this is what the documentary is based on, and this is focused on the more qualitative side of the event, so how people talk and discuss about the death penalty, which you'll see in the documentary. So I'll start with the 2014 survey. So this is the survey that showed 80% of the public supported the death penalty, and I want to make 3 points which contextualizes this finding. So first is the wording of the options. The question doesn't ask, do you support the death penalty or not? The option provided for retentionists is the death penalty is unavoidable. So you have a wide definition of retentionist. The option for abolitionist is the death penalty should be abolished. So what this shows is that 80% of the public thought the death penalty is unavoidable rather than enthusiastically embracing retention. My second point is that this question comes with 2 further sub-questions. And when you look at the sub-questions, it shows that this support is very qualified. So the first sub-question asks about the possibility of future abolition. So when you recalculate the figures for those who think the death penalty is unavoidable and do not want the death penalty to be abolished in the future, then the support for the retentionist is only 46%. I said that there's 2 sub-questions. The second sub-question asks about what if life imprisonment without parole is introduced? Would you support abolition of the death penalty? So this question again further qualifies the retentionist perspective. So altogether, those people who think the death penalty is unavoidable, should be kept in the future, and that even if life imprisonment without parole is introduced as an alternative, we should still stick to the death penalty. So these hardcore retentionists actually only amount to 34%, which is very different from the 80% headline results that's being reported in the media and that's been quoted by the Minister of Justice and the government. Now that we've looked at the government survey, I want to introduce our parallel survey. The aim of the parallel survey was to conduct a poll that can test the interpretation of the Japanese government survey. So it was important for us to use exactly the same methodology as the government survey. Both surveys, our parallel survey and the Japanese government survey, uses a random probability sample of the Japanese public aged 20 and above. It's a nationally representative sample. And in the parallel survey, I asked exactly the same question as the Japanese government survey, and you see the results of both surveys. And what we see is that the question is the one we just looked at in the previous slide. And what we see is that we have very similar results. And in the parallel survey, I asked further questions. And this is because I want to show how you ask the question is very important. And by asking different questions, you are able to contextualize further what this government survey question means and what this majority support really means. So first, it's not clear from the government survey question how committed the Japanese public really are to retention. All we know is that they consider the death penalty to be unavoidable. And this passiveness of this option makes it hard to judge how central the death penalty is to the Japanese people and whether abolition would have any serious consequences. So I asked a series of questions to see how vital the death penalty is to the Japanese public. What reactions would the public have if the death penalty were to be abolished? So first of all, I asked the public, my respondents, what would you do if the death penalty is, what would you just accept a simple government policy? And out of this 83% retentionists, 71% of those retentionists said they would just simply accept it if the government decides to abolish it. So here, I'm only focusing on the retentionists because it's the retentionists' views that should be of concern when assessing a potential backlash against abolition. And second, I asked further questions, possible scenarios about the absolute necessity of keeping the death penalty. 21% of the respondents considered abolition would decrease their trust in the police and the criminal justice system. 46% considered that abolition may lead to some victims' family attempting to take matters into their own hands. 52% of the retentionists considered they may sign a petition to bring back the death penalty. So these figures combined, and when you look at the 71% of retentionists expressing their acceptance for abolition, puts into context the headline figure with what it reveals about their commitment to retention. And what makes this finding significant is that these are the same respondents, the 83% of those who considered the death penalty to be unavoidable. But these are the same people, the 71% of those who said they will simply accept abolition as government policy. And this calls into question what the government is actually measuring and on what basis the execution of prisoners is being justified. The next point I want to make is that in recent years, the Japanese criminal justice system, Ministry of Justice, has made various attempts to incorporate public opinion into penal policy, such as the victim impact statement and the side-binding system. And the reliance on public opinion to legitimize its death penalty policy has been a long-standing position of the Japanese government and the Ministry of Justice. But to our knowledge, how the public feels about shouldering this responsibility has not been tested. So we asked, who should decide the future of the death penalty? And what we saw is that less than half, so 40% of the respondents thought that the decision should be based on the results of public opinion surveys conducted by the government. The rest, 40%, thought that they wanted to delegate the responsibility to experts and state bodies. 20% said they didn't know. In a country that has made serious efforts to incorporate public opinion into penal policy, the enthusiasm for input does not appear to be reciprocated by the general population. So to wrap up, the death penalty has been justified on the basis of surveys carried out since the 1950s. The government has argued that the time has not yet come to abolish the death penalty because the public is in strong favor of retention. It's obviously a question of judgment to assess at what point legitimate responsiveness becomes unacceptable populism. But it would be a reasonable concern of any state if abolition could foreseeably lead to erosion of the legitimacy or the erosion of the trust in the criminal justice system. But the analysis of the 2014 government survey showed that just over a third of the respondents were committed to retaining the death penalty at all costs. The parallel survey also highlighted that behind the majority support, the same majority would accept abolition if the government decided to do so. And does this question the validity of the Japanese government survey? What we think is that our parallel survey actually complements the government survey. And I think it helps us to understand what it means to be a retentionist in modern day Japan, or perhaps in other retentionist states too. What we argue is that the majority of the public, the death penalty is a distant topic that has little to do with everyday life, and that is not something they spend time contemplating about. And when they are asked in a survey whether to keep or abolish the death penalty, retention is the default position that they fall back on, living in a retentionist state with a low crime rate. So the majority of the public take it for granted that the death penalty will remain. But how strongly or how unconditionally they want to retain is a different matter. And this is where our parallel survey and the deliberative poll that you will see later, and even the own government surveys, when analyzed properly, demonstrate that the legitimacy of the Japanese criminal justice system does not hinge on retention. All the findings point to the conclusion that the Japanese public possesses the capacity and the flexibility to embrace abolition. Japan has the death penalty not because its public is clamoring for executions, but rather because the Japanese government has not yet taken steps to fully understand the nature of public opinion on the subject. Were the government to change its stance on the death penalty, there is reliable evidence that its citizens would follow suit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now open the floor to questions. We'll begin with working press members, and hopefully Dr. Sato can help us, help guide the conversation into information that will help us as we then enter the viewing of the film. Are there any questions from working press, please? If not, I'd like to open the floor to the general public. We do have some time, so are there any other comments that perhaps that you eliminated from your speech because of the time constraint, but that you would now like to share?
Yeah, I could carry on. There are a few more slides if there's time.
I mean, yes. Alternatively, we could start the screening early and then leave a little bit more time at the end for some questions. Unfortunately, that time will be without an MC. It will be more unofficial, but if you're okay with that. Is it possible to start the screening early? It is. Okay, why don't we do that then? Was that okay?
Yeah, that's
okay.
fine.
We will now have the screening. The film is about an hour. Is there anyone, if there is anyone that is unable to stay for this screening, Dr. Sato is welcome to, has said that she will be able to join us in a separate room for anybody to have questions there. So we'll be exiting the room now. And then following the screening, there will be an unofficial time for Q&A. Dr. Sato will remain here at this table, and if you could please come forward and have an informal conversation here at the desk. Okay, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for being with us here at the FCCJ.